Hey, hey, Brother Charlie, can you come up here? Brother Charlie, you keep bringing your guitar to service. You wanna sing us a song before we start Sunday school this morning? You want to sing us a song with your guitar before we start Sunday school this morning? Yes, sir. Can you do it?
I'm going to sing my dear old mother's favorite song, Haven to Rest. So I'll just sing it in English and then I'll sing it in Spanish.
Excellent.
Okay? My soul inside a child was out on the sea. So burdened with sin and distress, till I heard a sweet voice say, make me your choice. Then I entered the haven of rest. I've anchored my soul in the haven of rest. I'll sail the sea no more. The tempest may sweep or the wild storm may blow. In Jesus I'm safe evermore. Oh, come to the Savior, He patiently to save by His power divine. Come anchor your soul in the haven of rest, and save my beloved is mine. I've anchored my soul in the haven of rest. I'll sail while sea no more. The tempest may sweep or that wild storm may blow. In Jesus I'm safe evermore. Tan triste, tan lejos de Dios me sentí, sin el perdón de Jesús. Mas cuando tu voz amoroso oí, que dijo, oh, ven a la luz, ya todo dejé para andar en la luz, la gloria que me llama. Ya todo dejé por vivir a Jesús y vivir la luz de su paz. No ven a Jesús, el feliz pecador. No te hagas ni ciegas llamar. Que ven a Jesús, feliz pecador. En él salvación hallarás. Ya todo dejé para andar en la luz del morir de neblina más. Ya todo dejé por seguir a Jesús y vivir la luz de Jesús. Y vivir la luz de Jesús. I'm going to sing this. I want to sing a song y'all will recognize. I learned it from the Corbett family. Let's see how. Now I've been traveling for Jesus so much of my life. I've traveled on land and on sea, but I'm planning on taking a trip to the sky. ready to go, watching Calvary flow. That will be the last before me. That will be the last before me.
Beautiful job, Brother Charlie. Beautiful job. So, I've been meaning to do that the last couple of weeks. Brother Charlie brings his guitar to every service, and I saw him bringing his guitar to every service, and I said, you know what? I'm going to ask him to sing for Sunday school. And then I told everyone I was going to do it. Last Sunday, I had so many notes, and so much I wanted to get through that after service, after Sunday school, the kids were like, you didn't do what you said. I said, I know it, but I had so much I was trying to get through, and I was, I knew I wasn't going to get through it all anyway, and I didn't do it. So I said, well, if he's got his guitar this morning, we're going to let him sing. That's what Grady was honking the horn over there on the phone. He was honking the horn to tell me Brother Charlie had his guitar. So, Brother Charlie, appreciate you singing for us this morning. That was a blessing. So, in Genesis, turn your Bible to Genesis chapter number 39. Genesis chapter 39. And we've been studying on Joseph. And last week I went through a whole lot of stuff, and I really, I got to thinking about it afterward, which you tend to do if you teach or preach or anything. You think about all the things that you thought about saying that you didn't say, or you have things that come into your mind afterward. You're like, man, I should have said this or I should have said that. But anyway, so last week, we looked at Joseph's life, and we were looking at how, a lot of times people will just look on the outside appearance and say, well, it's obviously God's will because God's blessing it, or it wasn't God's will because these things they're not lining up. And I just don't see that in the Bible. I just don't see that. I just don't see that in the Bible where you read the Bible and every time it was God's will, everything had to line up exactly perfect. There were no problems whatsoever. And I'm sure, if I just went around the room and say, instead of just me doing it, if I just went around the room and say, tell me a time in the Bible where it was God's will for something to happen, but a lot of things, popped up in the way. A lot of things happened before it actually happened. I mean, just take for an example, and we looked at all the examples in Joseph's life last week. But just take for example that God anointed David to be king. God anointed David to be king, and think of all the things that transpired in David's life between the time that he was anointed to be king until the time he finally took the throne. Like I said, a lot of people would look and say, you see, I mean, that can't be God's will. It can't be God's will because look at these things that have happened to you since then. And that's just not how God works. And so, obviously we started this out when we started talking about Joseph. We started talking about dreams, and again, like I said, I mean, I believe that you have to find God's will for your own life. You have to find God's will for your own. God's going to show you His will. And so, but a lot of times people have dreams, and Brother Leon mentioned the message by Brother Joe Arthur, and there are a lot of dream killers. There are a lot of dream killers, and we understand through the context of Joseph that there were continual things that happened in Joseph's life that could have been considered dream killers. Whether that was people or circumstances or things that happened, they could have been dream killers. But God had a plan that God was working in the background. And even though Joseph, no doubt, for 20 plus years probably didn't understand, he probably didn't even fully understand how God was working. God gave him the dream when he was about 17 years old, and it took 20 plus years before his brothers showed up, begging for bread. And that's when he finally saw, and maybe he saw once Pharaoh moved him up, and then he started storing that stuff. Maybe he did have an inkling of an idea, but he wasn't even sure that his father was still going to be alive. When his brothers came, he still wasn't sure that his father was even alive, because he said, "Hey, tell me about this man you're talking. Tell me about this old man you're talking about." And that's my paraphrase of the scripture right there. But tell me about it. He wasn't even sure. And so in Joseph's life, we went through time after time after time after time after time in Joseph's life where it looked bad. I mean, again, like I said, I thought about it this way. Had Job's 3 friends been Joseph's 3 friends, they'd have done the same thing to Joseph that they did to Job. You must have sinned. You're in this shape you're in because you sinned. The only way you can be where you're at right now is because of the sin, and just confess your sin to God and get it right with God. Maybe He'll change your circumstances. And again, a lot of times we judge the outward appearance. Obviously we know that God judges the heart, and man looketh on the outward appearance. But we look at the outward appearance, and if we see something like, well, you see that, I don't think it's the will of God, and we judge the will of God for other people's life, Brother Parks. We judge the will of God for other people's life, and we don't know. God didn't show us His will for their life. And yet we'll be judgmental, and then we turn into dream killers. We turn into dream killers because then we have to impart our words of wisdom. We have to impart our words of wisdom to explain to them how that they didn't know what they were talking about, and they really didn't hear God, and didn't understand God, and so they were obviously wrong. And so here, last week we talked about all those circumstances, and I have to be careful because, again, I'm just naturally judgmental. I mean, it's just who I am. I naturally, I'm a service technician at heart, so I'm constantly analyzing things, and I'm evaluating things, and I just look and analyze things. But I have to understand that I'm analyzing with only my perspective. And I don't know what God told you. I don't know what God showed you. I don't know what He did. And so anytime, even if someone asks my advice, I always have to leave that open that, hey, look, I'll be glad to give you some advice here. But this is how I would handle this situation. This is how I would react in this situation. But God may have told you something different. Again, like I said, I mean, if you'd have looked at this, you'd have said, well, not knowing the whole story, you're like, well, Joseph got sold into slavery. The other brother's still hanging out with the father. But if you don't realize that it was the other brothers that hated him, that sold him into slavery, you'd be like, well, what'd you do, Joseph? What'd you do? And then he gets down here in Potiphar's house, and so that's what we're going to look at in chapter number 39. It says, and Joseph was brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard, an Egyptian, bought him of the hands of the Ishmaelites, which had brought him down hither. And the Lord was with Joseph. I think that's said 4 times in this chapter right here. And again, like I said, from the outside looking in, if you didn't know any better, you'd look and be like, how in the world could God be with Joseph? How could God be with Joseph? How could God be with Joseph? And another thing that I thought about is that not only was God with Joseph, but Joseph was with God. And of all those things that tried to knock him down, Joseph never lost his faith in God. Obviously, we're going to see that later in the chapter whenever he's talking to Potiphar's wife. Through that great temptation, but Joseph never lost his faith in God, and if you think about it, I mean we're in Genesis chapter 39, so there's a lot of things, Brother Wayne, that haven't come about yet. For us, we have the Bible. We've had Jesus come and live a perfect life and die on the cross and was raised again the 3rd day. And so we've got the Old Testament, we've got the New Testament, and we've got churches, and we've got men of God to preach the Word of God, and we've got all the technology to listen to. My wife was listening to a sermon by B.R. Lakin, and she sent me a sermon by B.R. Lakin. We've got all the technology to listen to all those men of God from all those years. What did Joseph have? Did he have a church, Brother Leon? He didn't have a church. Did he have the Mosaic Law? Of course he didn't have the Mosaic Law. It's a few hundred years away from Moses. And so, what did Joseph have? Joseph had some stories Joseph had some stories about Abraham. He had some stories about Isaac and his father. And we talked about his father again. I mean, when you read the story about Jacob, I mean, at best he was lukewarm most of the time. At best he was lukewarm most of the time. He was pretty much doing Jacob things and and trying to make Jacob wealthy and being shady. For a very long period, I read it to you the other day, where Jacob was touched by he wrestled with the angel all night, and the next chapter he says, "Hey, he's like, hey, I need you guys to take all the idols out of the house." Take all the idols. Get rid of all the idols. And I understand that's not just in his house, but that was with the people that were with him. But we all understand that Joseph personally, again, we talked about how Joseph did grow up around Abraham. He didn't grow up around Isaac. He didn't grow up around those. He grew up around Laban, who we know was an idolater because his daughter stole his idol, and when he come after Jacob, he's like, "One of y'all got my idol." And she had it, and she had it hid, and we don't have to go into that story again, but she had it, and she had it hid. So his mom was an idolater, his grandfather was an idolater, and Jacob was at best wishy-washy for a lot of his life. What did Joseph have? What did he didn't have to me that makes me think about to whom much is given, much is required. I mean, think of all the stuff that we have, the advantages that we have, and yet when we're faced with sin, we fall so easily. We give in to temptation so easily. And yet here's Joseph. But what Joseph did have is the same thing we all could have. Joseph had his own relationship with God. Again, Joseph had, he had 11 other brothers. Obviously, we know Benjamin was pretty young, but those 10 other brothers, you don't see a whole lot of a relationship with God out of those other brothers. His sister Dinah, we know what she did. You don't see a lot, but somehow, some way, Joseph heard the story about his great-granddad Abraham and his granddad Isaac, and he saw what God was doing in Jacob's life. And he got interested in God and said, I want to know that God. And because of that, when you get to verse number 2, it says, "And the Lord was with Joseph." Again, he could have very easily said, "This is ridiculous." Like, what kind of God gives you a dream and says, "Hey, one day your brothers are going to bow down," and gives you another dream where you understand that your father and your brothers are going to bow down? And what kind of God gives you that dream, and the first thing he does outside of that dream is sells you into slavery? He could have said that. He could have easily said that. And again, like I said, I'd venture to say a lot of us have said something like that, at least in our minds. At least in our minds, whenever it didn't go the way we thought it should go. At least in our minds, when we thought it wasn't going the way it should go. My God, what in the world? What are you doing? And you can put your super spiritual hat on and your vest on right now and say, "Not me, I've never done that." Even the psalmist David did that. He said, "I looked around at the prosperity of the wicked, and I'm like, what is going on here?" And so, like I said, here Joseph, the first thing that happens to him after God gives him these dreams is he gets sold into slavery. And yet God was with him. You can't, like if you take that part out of the story, everything else crumbles. But because God was with him in his trial, he could go through that trial. Again, I mean, you think about Job, when Job was going through his trial, he couldn't find God. He couldn't find God. And his wife said, hey, curse God and die, and interpret that however, I've heard it interpreted different ways. Y'all interpret it however you want to. She still said, curse God and die. And his friends showed up, and they kind of pitied him for a little while. And then after they got over the initial shock of how bad it was, then they just lit into him, Brother Wayne, and all he wanted, he just wanted to know what God was doing. And God chose not to show it to him for a while. I mean, it'd be pretty tough for all your children to die and all your prosperity gone, and your wife say, curse God and die, and then your health's gone, and you don't know where God's at and what he's doing. But here's Joseph. Here's Joseph, and it says, and the Lord was with him. So again, like I said, I mean, there was no preset right and wrong. There was no read your Bible in the morning, when you wake up. There was no read your Bible in the evening when you wake up. There was no certain prayer time. It was all God and Joseph figuring it out. And so here is Joseph, and the Lord was with him, and he was a prosperous man. So when I read that, you think about being sold into slavery, being sold into this servitude that he was sold into, and yet he goes down there, and anything he touched. I thought about it. If he's planting corn, his corn's going to grow faster. It's going to grow bigger. It's going to have more ears on it. God just blessed him. Anything he touched, and guess what? And so it says the Lord was with him, and he was a prosperous man, and he was in the house of his master the Egyptian, and his master saw that the Lord was with him. Joseph had a testimony. You think about that, Brother Parks. Joseph had a testimony. Joseph had a testimony with Potiphar, and we know that because of Potiphar's wife, he's going to lose that testimony with Potiphar, even though he did nothing to lose that testimony with Potiphar. But Joseph had a testimony with Potiphar. He just didn't accredit it. He just didn't accredit it to Joseph. He understood that it was Joseph and Joseph's God that was blessing him. He said again, and his master saw that the Lord was with him. Not just Joseph. So apparently Joseph had a testimony. And Brother Leon, sometimes we feel a little awkward giving our testimony because we feel like we're in a bad spot. How much worse a spot could you be in that you were sold into slavery by your brothers, and yet you say, let me tell you about my God. Let me tell you about my God. Again, here is the servant telling the slave, telling his master, telling his owner, let me tell you about my God. My God's good to me. My God, and Joseph had a testimony, and Potiphar looked at him and said, you know what, he's right. His God, and I don't think he understood everything, but he did look enough and say his God is with him, and his God is prospering him, and as long as I treat him good, then maybe God will bless me as well. And I don't think he cared whether it was one of the Egyptian gods that they worshipped, or whether it was Joseph's God. He just said, hey, his God's with him, and I'll get blessed if I bless him. And so it says in Joseph, in verse number 4, it says, and Joseph found grace in his sight. And so here's Joseph, and he's working hard, and he didn't have a bad attitude. There's nothing worse than working with someone who has a bad attitude. We've all talked about it, but you work with someone on a job that's just got a lousy attitude. Jake's not in here today because I said it, but some person coined the term, but they're just energy vampires. Is what they are. They just pull the life. They just take all the life out of working on it. Some people enjoy getting up and enjoy going to work, and some people hate getting up and they hate going to work. And while they're at work, they make everyone around them miserable, and so no one wants to work around them. But Joseph was not that way. Joseph, again, even though he was in bondage, even though he was a slave, he got up every morning and did his work, and God prospered him for doing his work. And so he found grace in his sight, and he served him, and he made him overseer. So again, obviously Joseph was an excellent. I'm going to call him a recent term. He was an excellent COO. He was an excellent chief operating officer. It didn't matter. His dad saw it in him. His dad saw it in him and said, "Hey, go check on them boys and see what's going on." Potiphar saw it in him. Said, "Hey, you know what? I'm going to let you. I just want you to just run everything, just everything. I don't even want to know what's going on." Now, if you own a business, I don't think that's a good way to run things. But if you have someone exactly like Joseph, then you possibly can do that and just go enjoy your life like Potiphar was doing, or doing whatever work he had to do as he was working for Pharaoh. But understand, Joseph. And then once Joseph went to prison, guess what? Joseph became in prison. He became chief operating officer. And once Joseph come out of prison after interpreting Pharaoh's dreams, guess what Joseph became? He became the chief operating officer. And so God blessed him with that ability. And he used the abilities that God blessed him with. And so here he is. And so it's eventually, basically Potiphar, I believe it says right here in verse number 5, "And it came to pass from that time that he made him overseer in his house and over all that he had, that the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake, and the blessings of the Lord was upon all that he had in the house and in the field. And he left all that he had in Joseph's hand, and he knew not aught he had save the bread which he did eat." Brother Leon, he didn't even know. He didn't have to worry about it. He just knew that he left it in Joseph's hand, and every morning to come in, and the candles were lit, and when he sat down, there was bread on the table, and when he come in in the evening, there was bread on the table, and he never had to worry about a single thing. Can you imagine? Who wouldn't want that? If you owned a business, or obviously we're running a house right here, but if you owned a business running a house, who wouldn't want someone that they could depend on that much and just say, "Hey, when I had it, it was a mess. When I was running it, it was a mess. But now that you have it, I don't have any worries in the world. My anxiety level went from up here all the way to 0 on the scale. I've got 0 anxiety. I've got 0 cares in this world. I can just go do whatever I want to do and come back and know that my house is going to be prospering." That's who Joseph was to Potiphar. That was the testimony that Joseph had with Potiphar. And she's going to ruin it. And she's going to ruin it. And I know this is the adult Sunday school class, and it's mostly men in here. But I'm going to say to the men in here, she'll ruin it for you too. She'll ruin it for you too. Not your wife, but someone else's wife. Not your wife, but someone else's. And so we're about to see in starting in verse number 7, we're about to see the temptation of Joseph. And I was reading Matthew Henry, and Matthew Henry said the deliverance of Joseph out of Potiphar's wife's hand was just as miraculous as the Hebrew children being delivered out of the fire. Which I thought about that. I'm like, that's pretty good right there. And so again, that was Matthew Henry's thought, but I tend to agree with it because again, Joseph didn't have a Bible. Joseph didn't have a church. He didn't have a pastor. At this moment, he didn't even have a father he could go to. He didn't have a friend to go to, Brother Leon. And honestly, if you think about it, we don't have the Mosaic law yet. There were some moral laws There were some moral laws. Obviously, you understand from the book of Genesis, there were some things that people naturally understood were right and wrong. Whether it was Cain and Abel and the sacrifice, that it was understood what was a proper sacrifice and what was an improper sacrifice. Whether you take Sodom and Gomorrah and the sin of Sodom and Gomorrah, the sin that was prevalent in Sodom and Gomorrah, that people understood it was wicked. And think, I mean, God had already destroyed the land one time, and Noah was a preacher of righteousness. So if you're a preacher of righteousness, then guess what? Apparently there's a lot of unrighteousness that you're talking about as well, to make people understand the difference between what's righteous and unrighteous. And so what we're going to see is that Joseph understands. If you think about it, I think it's probably just the previous chapter, where Judah was going to kill his daughter-in-law because he thought she played the harlot, and she did, but she did it with him. And so Judah understood, and again, you think about the hypocrisy that was right there, the fact that he's going to kill someone playing a harlot when he didn't mind going to harlots. But anyway, you think of that hypocrisy, but he understood that what she had done was wrong. And so Joseph understands, even though there is no written law, again, we all try to find the gray areas in too many things in our life. God has it black and white. But we try to look for a gray area where we can justify doing the things that we want to do and say, well, I've said it many times to my kids, and I believe you should take the Bible and use the Bible and prayer time and to find God's will for your life, but be careful. I told him, I said, look, God, just because God told Hosea to go marry a wife of whoredoms, just because you can find that in the Bible doesn't mean you need to make that your life verse. So we have to be careful taking certain scriptures out of context and take certain things and say, well, you see right there, I mean, God allowed it that time. That's not a good thing, Gil. It's not a good thing. And I tried to use that because that's so abstract. People are like, wow, that's crazy. Exactly, it is. It's crazy. But sometimes you hear someone and they'll take a verse out of context and you're like, come on. You're not even doing a good job taking it out of context. You're not even making a good case for what you're doing right there. You just grasping at straws right there. And so here is Joseph, and somehow Joseph's relationship with God is going to get him through this. Do you have a strong enough relationship with God that it will get you through this? If it comes in your life, and again, we've got all different ages. We got Brother Charlie here who's in his 80s. We've got people here who are teenagers. We got all different ages right here, and all kinds of different temptations and all kinds of different things. But understand, as a man, this is a temptation that you're going to face. It's a temptation you're going to face. And I understand what James says. I understand what James says. And it's true. But here, Joseph is facing this temptation, and his relationship with God is what is going to get him through. That is the two excuses he uses to get out of this is, number one, my master's been good to me. How could I sin against my master? And number two, I can't sin against my God. That's what he used. Do you have a close enough relationship with God that even comes into your mind when that temptation shows up? For us who are married, do we have a good enough relationship with our wife that we say, hey, I couldn't sin against my wife. I couldn't sin against my wife. We have all kinds of things. I can't sin against my church. I have a testimony. I go to Concord Baptist Church. I got a testimony of going to Concord Baptist Church, and I'm not saying I am saying use whatever motivation you need to use to keep you from committing this sin. Whatever motivation you need to use, if that's the motivation that keeps you from committing this sin, then by all means use it. We have lots of motivations. Joseph had lots of excuses not to use them. Riley, he had every excuse in the book. He's in a foreign land. No one really knows him. He's been sold into slavery. He could have easily said, well, God forsook me. God forsook me. I'm in this foreign land. I had this dream, and now my dreams are dashed. And God forsook me. And I'm down here, and I'm sold into slavery, and no one knows me, and no one cares about me. And no doubt, Joseph had to be crushed by the fact that his father never come looking for him. And it's going to take him 20 plus years to find out the reason his father never come looking for him was because his father thought he was dead. It'll take him 20 plus years to find that out. And he had to be crushed with the fact that the one that he depended on most on this earth, the one that he thought loved him more and proved his love by giving him that coat of many colors and showed him his love more, that he did not come looking for him, Brother Wayne. A lot of people use a lot of lame excuses to commit sin. And that's really what they are. They're just lame excuses. You talk to some people, Riley, and they are just natural excuse makers. They're just born excuse makers. If you say, why is this not done? They just start rambling them off. They got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They got enough excuses, We all make fun of the dog ate my homework, but they've used that one 100 times. They've used that one in school 100 times. Dog ate my homework, tornado happened. It just microburst at my house and blew my schoolwork away. And I looked all night for it out in the woods and couldn't find it. And again, there's natural-born excuse makers. Joseph could have been a natural-born excuse maker and said, hey, I've got all these reasons why it's okay. But that's not who Joseph was. Why? Because Joseph had a relationship with God. And because of that relationship with God, he said, I cannot. You think about the pressure that Joseph would have been under. Again, for the men in here, he's late teens, early 20s. Late teens, early 20s, a young man alone. And here is this woman, and she's putting a full court press on him. She's not giving him an ounce of relief. And she didn't just, it wasn't just say no one time and I'm good. It says day by day. And it came to pass as she spake to Joseph day by day that he called. This happened. Who knows how many days this actually went on? Again, the Bible doesn't tell us. It just says day by day. Brother Wayne, this could have went on for months. It could have went on for months that she knew where Joseph would be. Again, Joseph's over her house, and she knew where Joseph's be, and she didn't just allow Joseph to come up with the excuses. She provided the excuses for Joseph himself. Potiphar's gone. He's gone. Like in Proverbs, he's gone on a long journey, and he's taking a bag of money, and he's not going to be coming back anytime soon. He's gone. And the men of the house, I've moved them somewhere else. I've got them working somewhere else. She set him up not one time. Again, sometimes we say no one time, and we think we're good. Every day he faced this temptation. Every single day that temptation was right there. And again, like I said, I think she did everything she could do, and she even went so far as to eventually just grab him and try to force him. But I think she did everything she could do, day after day after. Because sometimes it's easy to say no on day one. Sometimes it's easy to say no on day two, you know. But eventually you'll finally just give in. Just give in and be like, what's the point? What's the point of fighting? Why am I fighting this? Why am I fighting this anymore? No doubt every day he went back to wherever his chambers were, and he got down on his knees and prayed and said, oh God, please make her stop. And you know what God didn't do? God didn't make her stop. And the only way Joseph got relief from the temptation was to flee. Again, I mean, how much worse a situation could you be in? I mean, it wasn't like he could quit his job, Brother Parks. If you're working at a job where some woman is a temptation to you, you can quit your job and go somewhere else. Zach, he couldn't quit his job. He was a slave. He couldn't stop doing the things that he was doing. He had to run the house. How was he going to go to Potiphar and say, Mr. Potiphar, me and you, we need to talk. Mr. Potiphar, me and you, we need to have us a conversation about your wife. Who wants to have that conversation? How do you think that conversation's going to go? Your wife is a harlot. Your wife is a wicked woman. Your wife, and I'll be honest with you, in my mind, I think Potiphar probably knew she was. But anyway, he probably knew she was, Gil. A lot of men marry a woman because she's that way, and then they're surprised when she's still that way after they're married. But anyway, and so here's Joseph. And the only way he survived was when she laid hands on him fleeing. And if you're going to survive, you're going to have to flee. You say, but Joseph didn't have any, he couldn't do anything about it except flee. Riley, and deal with the consequences of fleeing. We'll look at it more next week, but just deal with the consequences. She lied. Everyone believed her lie. Every time someone lied about Joseph, they believed it. Every time Joseph lost his coat, they told a lie, and whoever they told a lie to believed the lie. And so she finally said, okay, I'm done. I'm finished. This is never going to happen. And so she told the lie, and she's holding this coat up. And those other men that worked in the house, and she used his race against him. Now, it didn't bother him the day before. It didn't bother her the day before, the day before, the day before, the day before, the day before that he was a Hebrew. But she knew it bothered every other man in that house. She knew they were jealous because he was a Hebrew and he was exalted, and they had to work under him. And she used his race against him. And she used his race against Potiphar and said, hey, you brought this Hebrew in to mock us, to mock me. We'll get back in it next week. Thank y'all for listening.